Investing insights with Right Property Group, exploring trends in real estate and helping property investors gain financial security.
Welcome everybody to the last YouTube version of Investing Insights for 2022, Vic, as we record in December
2022.
Yeah, I forgot the date, but it's our last one.
It is.
Of the film version.
Yes, and the year's absolutely flown, and it's amazing, right? So each year you think you're going to get all of these things done this year, and you come to December and you realize, hang on, maybe I haven't paid as much attention because the time's gone so much faster than I realized it would, right? And it's true with general life and investing as well.
I think this year has been the quickest year on recent records, for me anyway.
Yeah.
I just feel like we were here last year, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And yet so much has happened over the year, which we won't go through because everybody knows what has happened, unless you've been living under a rock. But 12 months, just super, super fast. And so what's really, I guess, exciting is to see what the next 12 months brings, because there's going to be just as many changes as we've experienced, whether it be personal or business or in investing or whatever the asset class is. There will be a remarkable difference this time next year, as there always is. And I guess as I say that, the question we get around this time every year or a month prior to this is it a great time to be investing in December? Is December the month to purchase?
Invest.
And it used to be.
Yeah, not anymore.
Not anymore.
Not thanks to COVID. And I think the trend was changing as we are going into COVID as well, that December no longer became that big rush to purchase or to sell. And a lot had to do with the ease of transaction and the ability of people to be able to tack and change with their mortgages. Traditionally, when we started investing in the very early years, you and I would have absolute shopping sprees at Christmas. That would be a Christmas list shopping.
It would be. Yeah. And you'd just wait for this time of the year. But I think you're right. It's become far less clunky, the process of purchasing or selling. And so people don't really have any, I guess, full stop or moment in time with us. So, well, I'll wait. Even the spring selling season this year was a great example of that. And albeit that the circumstances around the spring selling season have changed this year, we're not seeing those sort of massive volume upticks.
That's right,
for the spring selling season.
And I guess a lot of it has to do with the like you said, the ease of transfer of information, right? So if you look at if I can call it the yesteryears, because information was transferred via newspapers, magazines, and so forth, you are able to then shape the market a lot slower as opposed to right now, where you can really, with the right commentary and the right amount of focus by a journalist or a media outlet into a sector, can shape the market significantly.
Do you know, that's a really good point, and a really good example would be if we went back, let's call it 15 years ago or thereabouts, but imagine we were in today's circumstances with higher interest rates, world economies in flux, European wars, et cetera, off the back of some would call a rather large boom in real estate. But if you go back 15 years ago and change what we think is going to happen, put the same changes in 15 years ago in regards to what we believe the changes are next year going to be, in today's technology-assisted process, so it's instantaneous, right? So let's imagine that the buffer rate was decreased and the interest rates come down. Well, almost overnight, you'd see a shift in the market. You go back 15 years ago and that would have taken months.
Yeah, at least 3 months for
to work its way through.
Yeah. So a lot of people, ourselves included, were reliant on the data that was given at the back of the magazine. So for those that have started investing in the recent years, a lot of the investing data was not as readily available as it is right now. And so quite a few investors were reliant on the back few pages of the property magazines where they were showing which suburbs had gone up, which suburbs had gone down, both from rent and value point of view. And you really needed 3 months worth of data to shape that. And so therefore, it wasn't instantaneous. At the very best case, it was 3 months.
Yeah, and that would be best case. And also to add to that, the average person wouldn't have been able to afford the type of data that we get today back then.
No.
It would have been out of reach for almost everybody unless you're an institution or institutional organisation. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's Pricefinder, CoreLogic, XYZ, for $30 a month, you've got everything.
Yes.
Or thereabouts, maybe $60 a month.
Which also creates a problem out
Correct.
there, because then a lot of people become too data-centric and you get too reliant on the data to help make your decisions. It is just only one facet of your decision-making arsenal. And you really need to bring in the ground truth, the experience, and your entire plan and capability into play before you implement what the data is saying you should implement in terms of investing.
Absolutely. Which brings us to today's subject, which is a follow-on, Vic, from the Facebook Live that we did last Thursday or thereabouts. And it's about the subject is 3 little factors, which are quite large, but 3 little factors which most people aren't talking about or even thinking about that could potentially change yet next year's market. Now, next year is a little loose in terms, it could be January, it could be December next year. That's a lot of crystal ball gazing, of which not even the economists know when these components will change. But so today is about what are those 3 factors, components that will, if they emerge, will definitely reshape the market. But we think at least 2 of the 3 will be there next year, and probably within the first half of next year, which is a big call, but we're pretty confident. So let's get into it, because we also want to speak about what the listeners should be doing to ring fence, protect themselves over the Christmas period with their portfolios and their credit score. But we'll leave that to the back end. So let's get to the first point, Vic. And the very first one for me is the neutral cash rate.
Yep.
So the neutral cash rate is when effectively the RBA will say, you know what, we've reached a level where we think inflation is beginning to get under control, and we see that the numbers within the economy, people are tightening their belts, spending is decreasing. So we'll keep the cash rate where it is, referred to as the neutral cash rate. Now, we had a taste of that, albeit a little prematurely, around about 4 months ago or 3 months ago, or whatever it was, where, if everybody remembers, the RBA decreased the increase. So instead of 50 basis points, they dropped it to a 25 basis increase. And what happened was the banks at the same time started to give some narrative and communication around saying, well, maybe we've hit that neutral cash rate. This is the beginning of the end of the rate increase cycle. And what that did to the consumer was it gave them a hope that they now know what they're going to be dealing with in terms of, well, here's our base rate, here's our floor level. We know what we're going to deal with, so we can effectively and confidently jump into the market. And we saw buyer activity nearly triple within 48 hours. So the agents were reporting back to us saying the phones are rung off their hook. Buyer inquiry is super, super strong. We still don't have stock on market, but it was in and around that narrative around the neutral cash rate. Now, if we get to that point next year, which some would, I guess, argue that we are, in line with what the RBA's comments around a soft landing and the economists' chatter around a soft landing for the economy, that in itself would mean that, well, perhaps there shouldn't be too many more rate rises in the future. But nonetheless, once we reach that neutral cash rate, it will give everybody that confidence in terms of their budgets for their biggest expense, which is the mortgage, and allow people to confidently then re-explore the potential market.
So the 3 things that we're talking really are the catalysts that'll occur in the market. We've still got the fundamentals, your immigrations, your rent, your yields, your scarcity of good property. All of those things are there. But these are the catalysts that will come in. And once we start getting a little bit of surety in terms of, okay, we've reached the threshold, it may go sideways, it may come down, or it'll just give a lot more certainty with the investors and home buyers to say that that's my maximum cost, right? Now, we also need to put it in perspective. Whilst the stance with RBA, when they reach that neutral point, is going to be that they'll soften their tone, they will start talking about potential interest rate decreases. Let's look at it from a holistic point of view. The media articles right now are saying 8 consecutive months of interest rate increases. But let's look at what happened before that. There was 9 or 12 months of rate decreases from the highs that we had 11 years ago. Right, so this could be that it's just the stance that is, or the words that they use becomes a lot softer. The tone becomes a lot softer, but we don't actually get any rate cuts. Because we're actually back at normal, or almost back at normal rates. What was there some 10, 11 years ago, and if you look at it historically, this is where normal cash rates normally lie. We went into emergency measures. Now we're ramping it back up to curb inflation. Otherwise, if money is too readily available, we spend willy-nilly.
And we have the same problem that we have today. Right. So I actually agree with that. It'll be the tone from the RBA initially that will set the pace of the market, I guess. In terms of an interest rate reduction, I think it would be a very big call by the RBA to drop rates in the foreseeable future.
Yep.
Now, once again, the foreseeable future is open for, I guess, interpretation. But it's we're still got high inflation. Even if we get to that neutral cash rate, we still need the trickle-down effect of people essentially hurting.
Yeah,
like that's what it's about. That's what they're trying to do, is hurt in a very soft way.
And the property market is just collateral damage.
Yeah, very much so. They don't want. That's a really good point, because the RBA and the powers to be don't want a collapsing market, because that's, as we've discussed before, that's the wealth effect. You know, how people feel about the equity in their homes and the growth in their homes is referred to in part thereof as the wealth effect, and that gives them confidence to spend within the economy when the time is right. Now, some would argue that the powers to be are trying to hurt that wealth effect so that you do stop spending. And quite frankly, if we all want interest rates to stop going up,
stop spending.
Stop spending. There you go. Solution 101. Stop spending your money, and it'll happen. But the tone will be the first, I guess, piece of the first bit of evidence.
Yeah, and we've already seen
that. Yeah. Correct. We've already seen that headline inflation is
the apology.
Yeah, decreasing. The apology. We're starting to see some of the data flow in from anything from the cost of shipping containers, which has decreased rapidly. The price of oil, as of today's recording, has dropped significantly to, I think it was pre-COVID levels.
Yes.
But yeah, that may go up again tomorrow. It's the fluctuating nature of that asset or that commodity. And we're also starting to see the inflation, or the headline inflation, start to decrease. So it's interesting to see over Christmas, after the retail spend, and once that's been reported on, how the RBA starts to talk around the economy early on next year. Yeah. But having said that, that doesn't stop the banks from putting rates up independently from the RBA because of the cost of funding overseas, et cetera, et cetera. So first piece is that softening tone around from the RBA, which will eventually translate into that neutral cash rate.
Absolutely, it will. Absolutely. And I guess the reason for softening the tone could also be the talk of a recession, right? So
the big R word.
The big R word, yeah. So that will be the trigger to further soften the stance.
Correct. And there are some economists that are absolutely 100% confident that we'll be in a recession next year.
Yeah.
Now,
it depends on what you follow, right? And it's half glass full, half glass empty sort of thing.
Well, I've given up trying to read the different commentary from the different economists, not just Australia but also worldwide, because their commentary changes. There are very few that stick the path with what they've originally said and are still adamant that we're going to go down that route.
Because the data keeps evolving.
Because the data keeps evolving, and the days are long, but the years are short, as we keep saying. Think about 12 months ago. 12 months ago today, we were in a super hot market.
Yes.
12 months ago.
This is how quickly markets can change.
Correct, right? And everybody just cast your mind back to where you were 12 months ago and how quick it's evolved, but how quick the timeline was. And this is what can happen. We saw it also with the beginning of COVID. We saw it at the end of the APRA handbrake. We saw it at the end of not the last federal election that we just had, but the one prior to that. Yep. We saw it at the end of the GFC. We saw it at the beginning of the low doc days. We saw it at the beginning of the first homeowner grant when it first evolved, just before the low doc days. Yep. So things change very, very quickly, which leads us to point number 2.
Yep.
And that is the installation, I guess, for want of a better word, of government grants, whether it be federal or state, in some way, shape or form. So that could be a first homeowner grant, construction grant. We've already got the shared equity scheme in Victoria. We've got the stamp duty concession in New South Wales. Be very surprised if WA, Queensland, all the other states and territories don't come up with their own version thereof. But once we start to see more ways that homeowners can get into the markets that are being helped by federal or state government, in combination with perhaps point number 1 around the neutral cash rate, and watch the market move.
Yeah, it'll explode in that sense. So a really good example of this is, as we headed into COVID, was the WA government's builder's incentive, right? So if you were to build a investment property or a home, didn't have to be a first home, you got a 20K grant.
Yep.
Right, provided it was in your own name. And the ensuing effect was that the construction industry got overrun with contracts. People brought forward, including myself, construction to take advantage of the 20K grant that the state government was giving. Now, if you roll that out to other states in different forms, and you mentioned the home equity scheme, the stamp duty concessions here in New South Wales, it does have a huge impact on the market. It gets people that are sort of sitting on the sidelines. It gives them the catalyst to jump in. And in reality, when we talk about these 3 things, we only need 2 of them to fire to substantially change the market.
That's the point. We only need 2 of them. And we haven't even spoke about the third one yet.
Yeah, which is the most critical one, I think.
I guess. I think it is too. But also with these state and federal grants, I even note that I think it was late last week, the New South Wales state government are now full force into rezoning a lot of the Sydney Basin.
That's a huge change.
That's massive. Now, most people would go, beauty, that's rezoning, that's awesome. And it is if you own the land. But the local councils are also arcing up over that fact, saying that's really, really good that you're going to rezone this land, but we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the civil works capability to make this happen. And this goes back to something that we mentioned when the federal budget released their housing accord. We said for this to all to work, you need federal, state, and local councils to collaborate.
Yes.
And at the very first step, we've got this disconnect between local council and state government. But it is. It's like when we look at it, the New South Wales government has said, well, okay, we need supply. Supply is going to change all this. I still think they've got it wrong. Whilst the rezoning of land so therefore the potential construction of new dwellings is this, I guess, altruistic solution to it all, there's 8,000 components before it which we don't have today to allow that. So, as an example, we talked about civil works. I have a client who their job is civil works for these large, these large developments. He's got a quarter of his machinery parked up. So whether it be graders, B-double trucks, dozers, whatever it may be.
Can't get workers.
Because they can't find the staff to operate them. So it's a huge, huge problem, let alone, okay, well, so let's say we've got the civil contractors and the ability to do that. Who's going to do the building? Where are the materials going to come from? Who's going to get the funding to build, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so whilst the notion of constructing is a great solution to the problem, I still think it's putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
As I've said probably a dozen times now, let the retail investor get involved. Why not also focus on existing stock, existing dwellings?
Yeah, and this is how it works in the sense that when you have these government incentives come in, so we talk about the first homeowners grant. One of the important things that we failed to mention was the 5% first home buyer deposit scheme.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's got a huge impact on the market, especially when you talk about point number 3 in a second. But every time there's a government incentive that is in place or introduced that makes that reduces the barrier to entry, you get an immediate flood of people coming in, and it's the supply and demand effect where the property market then actually rises up to meet it. So in other words, the prices go up, or the competition goes up really high, and what they used to do in terms of discounting is no longer available. So the prices don't actually go up, but the discounting stops.
Correct. In fact, I did an interview with a journalist the other day about that very thing, and what it does is it very quickly drags up the asset value of that corridor that the grant is slanted towards, and it's a sort of a null effect.
Yep.
I guess you're in a very quick period of time, you're paying more than what you would have, let's call it, just put a number to it, 6 months ago, but now it's funded. And the only people that really win out of it are the people that are involved. Simple as that. It still is a barrier to entry very quickly because there's a serviceability issue here, which brings us to the third point.
Yep. And I think that's one of the most important points that we need to be looking forward to next year, which is the reduction of the assessment rate. So there was a episode that we did with Z Shua from MLS Finance where we talked about the impact the assessment rate has. Now going into COVID, our assessment rate's been 3%, so it had been increased. So what does that mean? If you're borrowing at 5%, you're being assessed at 8% principal and interest. So that's a significant increase in the repayment amount they're plugging into the calculator, which then reduces, according to Z, if you're able to borrow $1 million, all of a sudden you're able to borrow only $600. Now that's $400,000 off, right? So it pushes you out of your purchasing bracket significantly, but importantly, it also pushes you out of your ability to refinance.
Correct. So if you're an investor, what Vic's referring to there, if you're an investor, obviously we like to refinance, whether it be to reset our interest-only characteristics or time period, or we want to recycle the equity to go again, to leapfrog or whatever it may be. Be liquid all the time, as we say every single podcast and live. But the other, I guess, cohort here is the homeowner.
Yes.
Not even the first homeowner, just a homeowner who's looking to either get into the market or re-get into the market. They've got their serviceability, albeit halved. Yeah. Now, if you think about it and we expand on that, where's the rezoning happening?
In the mortgage belt areas.
In the mortgage belt, in the affordable corridors. And so what it does, and we see this time and time again over every single cycle, which is, I guess, our fortunate place having done this since 2000 or 1999 for you. It's so we get to see not history repeating itself, but we see the same patterns, I guess, occurring. We see the same trends start to evolve. And so what will happen is, along with the reduced affordability via the assessment rate, and then the physicality of the affordability as well, with the rezoning of land, with the new suburbs being created, and because we were talking about Sydney, that southwestern corridor is an example, the influx of people that have moved there for the new homes because they want a lot of people want new homes, and it was fortuitous for them to do so, whether it be the construction grant and what have you.
Yep.
And it starts to perpetuate that area and it surrounds, right? So this will be a matter of history, I guess, repeating itself, which is also why when we look at the data that we see the top end of the market having capitulated more so than the affordable corridors because there's an extreme affordability factor there. In fact, speaking of data, and you mentioned it earlier, ground truth, I think it was episode 54 where we say, don't always believe the data. There's got to be the combination of the ground truth and the data. So anyone who hasn't listened to that episode, go back, episode 54, I believe. So good
we might put this in the comment section.
In the show notes, yep. So that assessment rate, Vic, is huge. We're not talking about a reduction in the interest rates. We're talking about the assessment rate. And what we've seen typically over the years is that whilst the cost of money is a very important factor, it's not the be-all and end-all.
No, it's not.
It's the availability of the credit as opposed to the cost of the credit that is, dare I say it, more important at certain times of the market.
Yeah. So if money is flowing freely and the spread between the income coming in other words, the investment, the rents, and the mortgage repayment isn't that great, you will still be seeing a very buoyant market regardless of the interest rates. And if one needs to just simply cast their eye back into the yesteryears of just after the GFC, when the rates were at 7.5%, the spread was about 2.5% between the mortgages and the rents.
The gross yield,
yep. So you had people jumping back into the market in droves because they could see the affordability factor there. The same will happen as soon as the assessment rates are dropped and the spread reduces between the rent coming in and the mortgages repayment going out. And at the moment, people are willing to buy and wanting to buy. They don't have the ability to buy.
Correct. Yep. And as you were talking about that, and we have mentioned it in a couple of the different podcasts around some of those historical moments in time around the gross yield, even parking aside the cost of money. But remember when gross yields, you started to see a sprinkling through for gross yields of 5% for houses in Sydney.
Correct.
That's like, this is in our lifetime.
Yes.
Not, back when.
There's a joke in there. I can't get to it.
I know. I started to, but I'm glad you stopped me. So when we started to see those sprinkling of 5% gross yields on residential houses, it was a real trigger point for a lot of investors to get into the market in Sydney. Now remember, every state and territory and then every zone within that has its own barometer on what is classified as a good yield versus not.
Yep.
Sydney 5% is a fantastic yield.
It is.
Like it's enormous. Whereas if I went to Darwin,
that's normal.
It would be a little different. 5% would be very, very normal.
Yep. So we've been talking about Sydney because it's an easy market to talk about, right? Because people can relate to it, and the data and the nuances are very easy to show. So if we look at Sydney on its traditional run, every time the yield position in Sydney on straight out purchases on houses hits above 4.5%, people sit up and start taking notice. You throw in the infrastructure, the population increase that Sydney is experiencing and the plans are therefore, and anyone can just simply Google the Greater Sydney Plan, right? And it's got a subtitle, Tale of Three Cities. You'll see the infrastructure and the population coming in. So as it hits the 4.5% and your assessment rate starts to come down in terms of ability to borrow money, and the talk of softening interest rates or certainty, right? Perhaps the better word would be certainty coming back in the market in terms of, that's what my end cost is. I'm getting this income. You will see people jump back in the hordes. And the same is true for every state, every little suburb, every little council area. You just need to drill down as to what the patterns are, what the opportunities are in comparison to what the catalysts are for today, and jump into those markets in line with what your portfolio dictates.
That's a really good point, because most investors that perhaps don't have the support who aren't fully consumed by investing in a healthy way, of course, they tend to buy, then they recede from the market, they retract from the market, and even to the point where they don't even necessarily look at the news and look at the different data points and mechanisms and components. And so what happens is they start to re-enter the market too long after the fact, because they're not fully, I guess, involved. They're not coherent on all these different movements within the market, because as you say, there are certain tells, and the tells are usually the result of these, I guess,
small fluctuations
in terms of the narrative, whether it be council rezoning, whether it be the buffer rate, whether it be the federal or state grants, or whether it even just be a collective of everything, and the media has collectively decided to report positively as opposed to it's all doom and gloom. Actually, as I say that, have you noticed recently, just in the last, I'm going to call it 2 to 3 weeks, that there has been a shift in the narrative for the Sydney market?
Huge shift.
It's from, let's call it 6 to 8 weeks ago, it was stick a fork in your eye if you own a property in Sydney, to keep a close eye on Sydney over the next 12 months. Now, as a disclaimer to that, we don't necessarily believe that everything that is being reported in and around the Sydney market is true. I think it's just a lot of people having a speculative, I don't know, conversation with themselves.
Run into the buying season of Christmas.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. There will be areas that I think in Sydney will capitulate in the first half of next year, and I think there are areas of Sydney which will do very well, all things being fair and equal. But I also think that that's the case throughout many regions of Australia, because even though I said we wouldn't talk about it, let's just paint the bigger picture here. Void of federal or state grants, which was point number one, void of the assessment rate, right? But what about the fact that we know that we've got a huge immigration uptick? What about the fact that we know we're so undersupplied for accommodation and that our vacancy rate is at historical lows? What about the fact that we are in the midst of the end of the finance cycle? What about the fact that we have a construction industry in crisis? When you put just those components in play with the three that we've talked about, and I don't know, maybe the best performing markets in the next 2 years are doing nothing right now.
Or being very selective in what you buy, so that you take into account what's going to imminently happen, which may be that the interest rates go sideways for a little while, and you need to be able to afford to hold on to it, understanding that property investing is medium to long term, not short term.
Absolutely. Now, there are a few other things that I think we should be talking about, Vic, as we've talked about our 3 points to look at. The catalysts for next year. And that is, and sorry, we're going to go into them a lot further and a lot deeper, I should say, in the beginning of next year. In fact, just as a side note, there's a lot of exciting things that we have slated for next year. So make sure that you keep listening in and visit the socials, visit the website. And if you're not, or if you would like to get some free resources in your emails without being spammed to death, just jump onto the website and put your details in there. But there's some exciting stuff for next year, for 2023, including a bit of an ebook. That was a really bad plug for an ebook. It's a bit of an ebook. Yeah, we wrote 3 pages and then we gave up. It's there's an ebook in and around one of our main subjects, which we've talked about many, many times, and that is designing a decade.
And I think that's really pertinent in that sense, because whether you're starting or whether you're an accomplished investor, I reckon next year is the resetting of your portfolio. And we've also talked about, shuffling the cards of property and working on the cards that you've been dealt with. That it lines up designing your decade and knowing the cards you've been dealt with and utilizing that to take advantage of next year's market is what's going to shape up your portfolio for the rest of your lifetime.
I don't want to sound, it's almost like a throwaway comment that we say every podcast. I don't want to sound like that property guy or girl.
That's girl you're referring to yourself, are you?
You're the one wearing a pink shirt.
It's red.
It's red. I'm just looking at what I've got on. It's I've got the, what's that, mauve? I don't know. You've got the Pizza Hut tablecloth. That's it. And I've got the curtain. It's I just lost the hell what I was saying. I think that, you know how the beginning of COVID, once we, I guess, assessed what COVID and what it was going to potentially do to ourselves, but also the economies, and how it was just a trigger point for everything to bulk up and run. Yeah. Obviously there was a lot of moving parts in there other than COVID, but I guess COVID was a trigger point for a lot of those components. I think next year is the beginning of a market that will separate those that have and those that haven't.
Yep.
You will see a lot of people add a zero to their net wealth, and you'll see a lot of people lose many zeros from their net wealth.
And it'll come back to what headlines you're reading and how prepared you are and how reactive you are to the changes, and how these changes are predictive, right? They can be easily be predicted. It's just that we can't predict the exact time of these changes. You need to be reactive to that, and the ability and the mindset to say, you know what, I'm going to pull the trigger early, as opposed to wait for all of the pieces to line up before I pull the trigger.
Yeah, as we say, I don't mind being a bit premature. I don't mind missing or being 5% early.
Yeah,
as long as I'm in and I've got the greatest choice, because you can't always control the situation, but you can control your attitude towards it.
Yeah,
and I think, I truly do believe next year will go down as one of those wish I should have, could have, did have.
Pretty much the same as what we said just as COVID started, is that watch the market. Yes, do your household budgets. Yes, make sure that you've got certainty around your jobs, but watch the market. Now's the time to jump in. It wasn't us trying to drum up business. It was us giving you guidance in terms of, hey, we've seen this market. COVID's just the catalyst over here right now. We've seen this market in terms of how it will influence negative news. And right now, if we're talking 2023, it's exactly what we're saying, is that watch the market unfold in front of you, in the point that it could be for some people, as you said earlier, Steve, that you got to sit it out. Because it's not lining up for you. Not enough pieces are lining up for you. But for others, it could be restructure, rethink, reevaluate, jump back in.
And it might not even be jump back in. Maybe it's just preparing yourself. But that's the whole point of the beginning of next year, is to assess and to activate something. Look, once again, doesn't necessarily mean purchase, but get yourself into a position. So as you say, get the household budget squared away, get the refinances going, get the capacities up, whatever it may be, because it's going to be choice next year that we haven't seen in a long time. Actually, as I say that, picture this. Let's imagine, or if you look at today's components, which we talked about, the vacancy rates, immigration, jobs numbers, etc. So put all them on the table, then go back to, I don't know, choose your time. The beginning of COVID, that could be a time, the end of the APRA handbrake, or even as recent as 2 elections ago. Right? And I would challenge anybody to say that the components that we have today are worse than what they were when those markets took off. Yeah, I truly do believe we haven't seen these components all together for as long as I've been doing this. 22 years.
It's really exciting.
I haven't. It's and I challenge anybody to do that, but I probably think that there wouldn't be that many people that have been doing it that long. Anyway, let's get to as we wrap up, Vic. There are, on a serious note, there are some things that we would urge all listeners to be looking at this time of year, so that you're safeguarding yourself. And the first one is check your insurance policies.
Absolutely.
So make sure they're current.
Yeah.
I can think of 2 very high-profile people. Well, that's probably overstating them. And they'd be listening. Oh, I know you're talking about me, Steve. Who this time every year their insurances run out because they're very, very busy people, large portfolio, etc. So do yourself a favour, jump onto whatever the platform it is, whether it's EBM, TerryShare, NRMA, ABZ, whatever it is, and make sure that you are current in your insurance.
And if it's falling due in January, February, prepay it.
Pay it a bit earlier. Yeah, sacrifice the month so that it's done and dusted. The next one, Vic, and you raised this one a couple of podcasts ago, I think, or the Facebook Live when we were talking about this, and that is in and around your direct debits. So whether it's an automatic transaction for the mortgage or the rates notices or the insurance or whatever it may be, make sure that you have enough money in the accounts, because it is Christmas and you're going to be spending and you're going to be going away and you're going to be mentally checking out, that everything is in place.
Yeah. And for someone that's looking at buying their first property, their first home, maybe be mindful of which account you're utilizing to do your Christmas presents and all that, because
Correct.
it breaks the trend, breaks the pattern of expenditure that you've got happening in that account. And so it will make the lending a little bit harder as well.
Correct. And on those direct debits, like just as we say with clients when we're doing the reviews, is set those calendar events in and around insurance, in and around direct debits, in and around end of lease, et cetera. Actually, that's another one. So if you have an investment property where the lease has ended, so that it's just run its term at this time of year, I would suggest to you that you stack the lease in a different direction so that you never have a lease that ends, no matter how buoyant the market is, but you never have a lease that ends anywhere, or my rule is from the end of October to the end of February. That's just my, so that quarter thereabouts, stack your lease. So whether now you need to go a 14-month lease or a 6-month lease, which I'd probably suggest over the 14-month, considering the buoyancy of the market, just get it out of this festive season arena.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to do that. And sometimes you will get resistance from the property manager because it's breaking the template. So they're only doing 6-month or 12-month leases.
Correct.
And you need 13 months to get this over the line so that you're not in the festive season. So you need to actually pick up the phone and talk to the property manager.
Correct. And just circling back to one of the points you made in and around your spending habits over Christmas and from which account and so on and so forth, have a good chat to your brokers, especially if you've got finance at the moment and you are looking for a property. And let's be fair, finding good properties even in today has been extremely difficult. But if your finance is running out and you go to re-up, also re-establish that finance, let's call it, I don't know, end of January as an example, where the bank will probably, or the lender will probably go, okay, give us some new pay slips and maybe some bank statements and what have you. Just don't go rogue over Christmas with your spending habits and buying Bentleys and boats and big Cuban cigars and expensive scotch. All right, Vic, we've come to the end.
Yes.
The last filmed version of 2022 for the YouTube fans. But we will be back in the next year. We'll do the same thing again, but we do have one more podcast with Phil Tarrant Squire. I think it's next week, which will be, or the week after sometime, which will be the last one
for this year.
For the year, for Investing Insight. So I won't wish everybody a Merry Christmas now. Or actually it will, because it will come out. The next one will come out after Christmas. So everybody have an awesome Christmas, have an awesome break, have a safe break. Recharge.
You deserve it.
Recenter. Yeah, it's been a tough bloody year. It's been a tough 3 years. And maybe use it as a time to reset goals. And what have you, and design that decade or readjust that decade. So once again, Vic, this is it.
Yeah, been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure, and we will catch you all in 2023.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature, does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs, and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.